We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that we really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side.
That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisades Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is former congressman from Texas, host of the Liberty Report, and an ambassador for Stansberry Research, Dr. Ron Paul. Dr. Paul, it's a pleasure to speak with you today, sir.
Hey, Tom. Good to be with you.
So I'd like to start maybe a little bit by getting something you and your co-host spoke about recently on the Liberty Report, and that is, what is a bad habit that the American people need to get away from when thinking about the government?
They should, well, in very general terms, government is too big and we need to radically reduce it. And we could start by just following our Constitution. That would be a good start. The Constitution was meant, to limit government size and scope. And we have totally forgotten about it. And it's out of control. So I think reducing the size and scope of government is high on the list, and then it can be very specific in different areas because some areas are worse than others. But it really does take in so much domestic issues and policies, monetary issues, as well as foreign policy. So reduction of the size and scope of government is a good goal.
So almost the idea of the bad habit that most people have nowadays is trying to basically rely on the government too much. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think that is very harmful because the politicians can't resist it. And they talk about cutting back all the time, but even the people who want to cut back, they have their exceptions. Leonard Reed, who I knew very well, had the Foundation for Economic Education. He says, yes, everybody wants to cut, but they all have a but, but don't cut mine. And that is the problem. They become dependent. And I describe the problem like an addiction. The stopping it is the problem. They might be very sincere in wanting to do it, but there is a lot of pain and suffering when you cut back and you're so dependent on it. There are, reactions to it. There are conditions that people just can't stand, and there's some pain. The last time we just had hands off on a recession, it was in 1921. It was a bad recession. It was acute. It lasted a year or two. And people suffered and the GDP went crashing down. But back then, they didn't depend on the government coming. But it was over in a year. But that all changed with the Big Depression and what we're doing now. Who ever dreamed, at least I didn't ever dream, that they would get to the point where they could keep interest rates zero or minus for a significant period of time. And it's been lasting. It's probably over a year now. And of course, I think it's below zero right now because we're getting price inflation. And so the real cost of money, it's amazing how well it works because everybody has to get some. And there's no panic over the whole thing. They talk a little bit about it, but I think it's one thing they've done. I think the plunge protection team, the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, has done a miraculous job of propping up the market no matter what. They're able to do it. So that serves as the haven. It sort of serves, yes, there's too much money, too much cash, too much credit, and the dollar is going to go down in value and prices will just tend to go up. So people are saying, well, stocks to a degree have always been a possible haven in that regard, but right now everybody's depending on it, and of course they have thrown in a few other things. Commodities, come and go, but people have resorted to the crypto market. But the real problem is the runaway inflation of the money supply. Because that's one of my pet peeves. If people talk about inflation and they only talk about the cost of living and the consumer price index, the CPI, and even some of the free market Austrians, refer to that. Oh, there's going to be deflation. I look at what the Fed's doing, and I look at that $120 billion they buy every month, to keep the market propped up. And they've been, of course, QE's been around probably close to a decade now, but then it restarted up again in 2019, and it is continuing. It is a surprise to me. But it means that it's a reflection of our position in the world. We're still a powerful nation. Military power has something to do with it. The wealth of the country has something to do with it. Perceptions have something to do with it. The ultimate value is actually established by a subjective indication of what people think it's worth. And right now, the perception, they aren't all that bad. We're limping along. I've often times over the years, had the chance to interview the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. I point out some of the things we're talking about here, the danger of spending and printing money and all. And they more or less say, yeah, we sort of agree with you, Dr. Paul. Yeah, this is the case. But as long as these activities, these corrections are done orderly, it's okay. You don't want inflation going up 100% in a day. Oh no, that's disorderly. But as long as you can contain it. So sometimes the orderliness is fudged. That is, they lie to us. They give us statistics that you can't believe. And I think that's what the plunge protection team is geared up for, because that came about after 1987, the big crash of 87. And the whole purpose there was to protect the stock market. And they're doing an excellent job on that. But for somebody like myself, who have looked at it for a long time and have an understanding of monetary policy, I don't think the payday has yet arrived, and there will always be a payday. A person, an individual, or a company that lives way beyond its means, and they can't keep up with production and taking care of it, they will eventually have to live beneath its means. And that's what we're moving into. I think that's why we're exasperated. That's why I think some people have already been affected by all this nonsense. And that is the political problem that we're facing. The poor get poorer. They get more numerous. There's more street people. It affects the politics of a nation. At the same time, all that the government can do is print, and it just fills the coffers of the people who already have a lot. And they even don't know what to do with it. They borrow the money, and then they put it back into the Fed, and they earn some money. And then the money is used to prop up the market. And so far, they always in the past have said, when the markets would get too rambunctious, people will say, it's different this time. This is going to go sky high. This time, I agree, it's different, but it's much worse because they have deceived the people, and they have convinced the people that this can last forever. I happen to take the position that it can't last forever because you have to have production. And I don't think we're keeping up with production. Not if we just print money and pay people to stay at home. And you can't even get people to do the work. Why work? That's a nice dream to have. But my understanding of how the world works says that won't continue.
Of course, Dr. Paul, you mentioned inflation, and it's all over let's say the mainstream media right now, but I'd like to get your take on it. What is your definition of inflation, and how is it being misunderstood and maybe misused by the media?
Well, I limit it to the increase of the supply of money and credit. And sometimes people add a phrase to that, and they add in and out as the production. But no, I was watching all this activity in the 70s. Matter of fact, in 1971, when Bretton Woods broke down, is when I decided I was going to speak out, about monetary policy. So the inflation in the 70s, generally what was watched every single day was the money supply. And of course, they didn't do much about it other than continue it until Volcker came in. But the money supply was the big issue because that was the inflation. So when they talk about prices, which price index to follow, I think you're talking about the effects of the inflation. You increase the money supply and destroy the most important pricing mechanism, and that is is the market rate of interest. That's what's really helpful to people, to tell them what they should do. Should they save or spend or start a business or pay down debt or whatever? And there is no market rate of interest. So I think the inflation is done by the Federal Reserve, and the motivations are powerful. The people who support it are powerful because everybody gets a check from government, aren't interested in the philosophy of it. They're interested in whether the check comes. And I don't know how often you've heard this, but people often will say, and I always pay attention to it, that only problem is I don't have enough money. They never say, my money is not buying stuff like it used to. They're not saying that the prices are going up, the cost of living is going up. They say, I just don't have enough money. And so just look at what the solution is. And they've been able to get away with just printing money, not thousands, millions, and billions, trillions of dollars. And it's out of the hands and controls of the people who are supposed to be the government. Just think of what the Federal Reserve can do just by control of the money system and rigging the interest rates. They can control trillions and trillions of dollars. They can make or break any industry that they want to. And yet, under our Constitution, you're supposed to appropriate and authorize all the money for all spending. But no, this theft of wealth by printing the money and diluting the value is it's a tax on the people. It's certainly immoral, should be, and really illegal and unconstitutional. But it continues because the short run is like the drug addict. Give me the drug and I'll feel better. Don't stop my drug. And everybody in all the industries are that way. Don't stop the drug because I need it, because there will be withdrawal symptoms and nobody likes it.
You mentioned the Fed being able to control interest rates, Dr. Paul, and that kind of makes me question if the Fed is going to be able to control price inflation through policy.
Well, they always try to, and the day that I sort of had an awakening in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window, he put on wage and price controls. And wage and price controls have been known all the way back to Roman times because they debase their currency and they think the solution is the prices are going up. It's businessmen, too much profits. It's labor. They demand higher wages and they have to be stopped. So wage and price controls have to be put on. But that does not, that's treating the symptom. It doesn't work. It makes the conditions much worse. The conditions don't improve with it because that's an attack on liberty. It attacks the market. And, just think of the extreme authoritarian society like fascism and communism. That is an economic crime is really, really bad news. You can lose your life over that, but there's always an underground economy. They have to survive, and that's what they do. They need to market to survive and find out how to trade real value. And that is why sound money and allowing the market to determine prices is so important. Otherwise, it has to be controlled by authoritarianism, and that is the sacrifice of liberty. That's where we are today, and it doesn't look good from my viewpoint, except for the people I meet and other people who have radio talk shows that are interested in this subject, that they know and understand that. I think there's a lot of people, in spite of how horrible it looks, are waking up. In 1933, Roosevelt comes in and he wants to print endlessly, so he takes in the gold, steals the gold from the American people, and nobody seemed to care. I'm hoping we're further along now. I hope that, when that day comes, whether it's Mexico, U.S., or Canada, or wherever we are, that the people will say enough is enough. I'm not going to give you my gun, and I'm not going to give you my gold, and you're not going to take my freedom anymore. So that's what is necessary. The people have to wake up. And I think that's what's happening with this lockdown business and the mask and the social distancing. It's erratic right now, but it's going in the right direction. And it finally got to the point where the kids were so mistreated and injured by this that finally the parents woke up and said, no more of this. And they'd go to the meetings, and the people did. So prevailing attitudes and reacting is beneficial, no matter how frustrating it seems, because what I've been talking about is very, very powerful forces who control the Federal Reserve and the spending and our foreign policy and all these things. But get the parents awake and say they're ruining my kids. Why do they have to wear masks in schools? And now the evidence is coming out. It hasn't done any good. It's done more harm than good. So truth is what we're looking for. And the one thing that is difficult for us is Marxism and totalitarianism has a belief that that you can't know the truth. It's impossible to know it. So they decide the truth. It's a political and also a philosophic belief that truth is something that individuals are not permitted to have and decide what is true and what isn't. So that is the responsibility of the well-meaning, smart people who become our politicians. And they're the ones who can decide prices and interest rates and what you can do and what you do when a cold virus gets a little bit out of hand. It's up to those individuals, and then there'll be a little bit of an argument over who's preaching the truth about science. But no, I think when the totalitarians, the authoritarians take over, they say they have control of truth. And that is where the real problem is because if you don't obey them, you're in big trouble. So, but even with as bad as things are, I do not think Marxism is so much more popular than it was when we have it in our Congress and all this now. But I don't think it's like when they wrote the Communist Manifesto. That was the beginning of a horrible, horrible period, and it gave us the 20th century. But I think when the Soviet system collapsed, the message was loud and clear, but it was not strong enough because we haven't had an adequate replacement. But I think this sort of last hurrah of saying Marxism is going to answer all our questions, I'm just hoping that there's more of us and people like you and others that will stir the interest of people to understand that liberty is what is important and people can solve these problems, and we don't have to depend on the authority of a few people who have no interest philosophically, spiritually, or anything else that others have any value.
So this move of the Fed becoming more politicized as of late is something that you've written about recently, Dr. Paul. So how has this happened, and how can they use their power to affect a woke agenda?
Well, it's happened because we've allowed it to happen, and the appetite for big government has been very, very strong. And it's sort of like, why do people stay at home and won't work when there's jobs out there? And it's because government's been sending them money, and it's actually, in a way, a logical decision. Well, if I'm not going to get paid anymore, or only a token, I'm not going to do it. So they figure out that getting welfare on the short run seems to be like a pretty good idea. But I think it should be a moral idea because I think it should be considered theft. I like the story that Bastiat tells, that if you and I can't go into our neighbor's house and steal, we have no moral right, and we shouldn't have a legal constitutional right to send our members of Congress, our government, to go into that house and take what we need because we need something or want something. So it has to be a moral issue as well as a pragmatic answer.
So, Dr. Paul, honesty and transparency seems to not be the policy of the Fed. And I know you are pushing for an audit. So what would this achieve?
Well, it would expose the Fed to what they're doing. Somebody said, well, you have to end the Fed. Yes, I do. And I'm in a position for that. And I want competition to put them out of business. So that is the audit tells you how bad it is, and it will motivate people to say, we need to get rid of this group of people because it's illegal, it's unconstitutional, and it's brought us all our havoc. It's a taxing authority because that's the way they collect revenue, by diluting the value that you have in your wallet. So this would continue. So I think it is. And that we had some votes while I was there in the House of Representatives, and we had an easy vote to pass the audit. And a lot of Democrats joined the Republicans, and there was a little bit of political things going on there. But basically, it was the argument with across the board of transparency. People, have a hard time saying, no, we don't want any transparency. We don't want to know what the Fed is doing. And that was a value. But ultimately, the Fed has to go. It's not likely to happen smoothly and completely, but it has to go because it has done so much damage, and people will wake up to that effect. And of course, I see the great danger because it finances everything bad that we do, and it facilitates the debt. None of that could happen. But when I went to Congress in '76, after I was motivated after Bretton Woods, nobody cared about the Federal Reserve, and nobody wanted to talk about it. It's much more talked about than ever before. It's on the debate all the time. And so I think that's a positive thing. But the best I could do, and I can get some support, especially people who have confidence in the crypto market, that I want to have competition. I want to get rid of the monopoly of the Federal Reserve to control the money. But and gold people are sort of split on how much confidence there is in the crypto market. But I'm interested in freedom, in a freedom of choice. It used to be that people would, as a libertarian, I would take the position that, we should have marijuana and things should be legal. You make up your own mind. But some people would come up, oh, you're the guy who wants to legalize marijuana. And as a negative, because they knew I didn't care about it. And I said, no, that's not it. I want to legalize freedom. Freedom of choice is the issue. It's not marijuana. And then they say, oh, that means you legalize all this stuff. Yes, I'd let everybody do what they want with their own lives and take their own risk, but they had to be responsible for what they do, whether it's economic or physical, health-wise or whatever. It's your responsibility. You should have that freedom. And, that argument went over very well on the college campuses when I was running for president. And I was always pleased with that because I always emphasize. I'll tell you, I describe liberty as a great thing. You could just see their eyes open up. You mean I could do what I want? No drug warriors around and their lives. But then I would point my finger and I say, but you have to live up to your responsibilities, and you can't crawl to the government and get yourself bailed out. If you have a venture in business or whatever you do, you're responsible for it. And I was happy that the groups that came to hear me were quite satisfied with that argument.
It seems like most people are either too busy or feel like or feel like the people in Washington, D.C. have an all-knowing crystal ball and know exactly what they're doing and will take care of the people and their best interests. So what are some of the ways that you think would be best to help educate people about how to take on more personal responsibility in their lives, as you were just talking about, Dr. Paul?
The first thing I would advise is don't turn that responsibility over to the government, because every once in a while you'll say, nobody knows anything of this, so we're going to require the certain classes in the government school. Now, I don't think that's the answer, even though the curriculum is horrible in the public schools. I would, on the short run, if there was a debate going on about, public money being spent and I can't stop it, I would always argue for choices, maybe, having somebody get a different thing. But that still isn't the answer. To me is what I have done personally since I've left Congress. I've had a Ron Paul curriculum. I have a homeschooling program, which I'm in charge of on what is being taught. And it does teach the Constitution. It teaches libertarianism. I don't have a secret agenda. My agenda is liberty. And it's been quite successful. Matter of fact, the lockdown has boosted the number of people coming to the homeschooling. So we'd certainly want to always make sure private schools and homeschooling is legal, and it's not always so. There's always times when they're challenging that. But I think it's through education. I would say that I quite frequently say that, once I discovered there was another philosophy in economics and politics, I said I decided I had to unlearn the things that I had been taught, and because in the public education, and I give a lot of credit, and I mentioned already Leonard Reed's name, who started the education group, the Fee Foundation, Foundation for Economic Education, and that was all totally private. It taught libertarianism even before they even had used, and many people use the word libertarian. So it has to be through education, and people have to realize that their interests are better served with freedom, and they have to do it in their own self-interest. You're allowed to be selfish, but you can't be dishonest. But whether you're selfish or not, and you think that not being selfish is better, that should be dealt with in a social sense, in a voluntary sense. Everything has to be voluntary. So if you want to teach habits, and if you want to have people do certain things, it has to be done by individuals, family, friends, churches, neighborhoods. Has to be voluntary. People don't realize that everything could and should be agreed upon with two parties. Voluntary means exactly that. Both sides agree. And if they don't agree, then they shouldn't be allowed to do it. With it now, all you have to have is the authority of government. Yes, everybody is going to wear a mask, Well, that is not the way to answer. But I think the solution comes through education. I spend a lot of time with it. I helped get the Mises Institute started. I think it's a great organization in providing the information to understand, how freedom works in the marketplace, because most people think that we have too much of that already. Look at the mess we have, but we don't have, a free market economy. And the word capitalism is totally misused. I don't like to use it as much, but if you use it, it's crony capitalism. It's not real freedom. And people have to realize that. So they have to be taught that. And the other thing that encourages me on how to accomplish what you're asking is that you don't have to wait till you get 51%. The 51% comes when the leadership of a society, the 8 to 10% of the people, are talking a certain message. And right now we see the prevailing attitude about being anti-mask and move on and say, we want our freedom back. It probably is a consequence of several individuals that were less than 10% of the population, talked about it, and why you don't have to feel guilty about saying, I don't want the government telling me I have to wear a mask if I don't want to. Besides, they'll make mistakes. Besides, they don't know what truth is. Some of them don't even believe truth exists. So we don't want to deal with that. So that's why, it's very, very practical, I think, to emphasize the fact that leadership will lead the way. It's through education. When the attitudes are changed, then all of a sudden, policies will change.
Dr. Paul, I'd like to go back to the Fed for a minute. What is the end game, as you see it, of the Fed's easy money and low interest rate policy?
Well, I think there'll be an economic collapse, because I think there will be a panic out of dollars. And that seems strange for a lot of people, because right now it seems like people are panicking into the dollar. They're still taking them in spite of all the printing we're doing. But no, I think they'll leave, which means they'll buy stuff, they'll buy things, and they'll buy metals. They may continue to buy some stocks, but they will leave And that means prices are going to go up. And then the inflation that people are all much aware of, and that is the cost of living is going to skyrocket. I mean, today I looked at something that said, there was somebody, prices of houses were skyrocketing. Then last week there was a report, it looks like it's topped out and they're starting down again. But no, today again, they're still going up. So eventually there's going to be a continuation of what's happening right now. People can't afford the houses. That's why they're living on the street, So it'll be an exaggeration of that. And then we've already had the violence, and then we've already had the demagoguing. We've already seen the battle between the rich and the poor, and blaming the rich. And I blame the rich who have lived off the government and have gotten all the benefits from government. That is what bothers me. But I think it's a difficult choice right now because, when you come to social media, they claim protection from the libertarian argument because they are, private and they can do what they want, and we're okay. But I don't see them as private. I think they have a lot of protection. You can't even sue them, So they get their protections. They get money. They've got an assistant, and I think that is why everything should be voluntary. The government should be out of the business. But I think it's going to be chaos. I think it's going to be really bad because we already saw it last summer. What it looks like when it just gets started a little bit. But I think it's going to be much worse. But there's going to, although I keep mentioning things, are bad and they're smoldering along and they're getting worse, and we see these problems. But I think there can be an issue, a moment that might be like a bell ringing, that even the markets discover, boy, this is something else. Right now, I think it was 2019 when the overnight rates skyrocketed, to 10%. That was a big event. And that's when they turned it on again, back to QE, and they're still doing it. So one of these times they're going to do that. An event will be like that. And the government said, don't sweat it. We know how to handle this. What we're going to do is this. We're going to do more. It might produce exactly the opposite. See, the markets were calmed down when they came in and supported the overnight rates and the purchasing by the government, the people, getting stuck with that. So no, that event will come. And when it comes, we don't know. And because I think everything is very, very fragile. I think there's no stability to the system. I see it as our economy, especially the United States economy or the West, it's like a skyscraper. It's built real high, but it might be like that apartment house in Florida. There might be something wrong in the foundation. And I think the foundation of our system is very, very fragile. And what the event will be, I don't think anybody knows. Sometimes it's somebody misconstruing something, and sometimes it's a foreign policy event. We're always involved. My program today, we talked about all this bombing again over in Syria, and threatening going on with Syria and Iran, and all these problems. One of these days, one of those events are going to get out of hand, and everybody will have to say, well, to be a good patriot, we have to defend it. Just think of the dramatic change in attitude in 1941, Pearl Harbor. As a matter of fact, they even talked economically about a Pearl Harbor event. And some people suggest maybe 9/11 will be this to take over everything, and there are people who are gearing for that. I think that's what the leaders of the cultural Marxist movement really want. So, and the more chaos you have, that's their goal. They want the chaos so that they can justify, this takeover, because they don't care if it breaks up. They see the collapse of our system as a value, because their belief is it doesn't work. You can't rebuild, Marxism and communism, or build it, with so much freedom left. So you have to get rid of it. Wipe the slates clean. And maybe that explains why, the numbers keep going up. 200 million people were killed in the 20th century by authoritarian government. And that's why people have to wake up, because there's no evidence that a free society and anybody that had the moral integrity of following libertarianism, no, that would be impossible. But that doesn't remove the fact that man is imperfect and you're always going to have good versus evil. And we have to learn how to handle that in a civilized manner.
As you're talking about our foundation that might be rotten, Dr. Paul, the U.S. values its gold reserves on its balance sheet at $42.22. Why is this? And is the idea that the gold hasn't been audited since 1974 correct?
That might be, but I don't think they want anybody to be paying any attention to it. So they just leave it alone because, economically speaking, it's irrelevant. But, we worked hard trying to get a true audit of the gold. And that may be it. But, if there's a calamity, which we're alluding to, those individuals in charge, and it's not going to be our current president. I don't think he's capable of managing what I'm talking about. But there are people, a company like BlackRock is going to have a lot of influence in picking up the pieces, and they may know exactly where the gold is too. So no, there will be some, but that's why in my planning, personal planning, I was a coin collector as a kid. We actually still had silver in the money, and there was copper pennies back then too. So I've saved all this time, but I never really thought that everybody else was going to do it. But I think the preparation is really very important. It has to be I want people to have something that they can control. And I have a little reservation on crypto because I don't fully understand it, but I want people to have control. And that to me is having it. But then you come down to it. Ron, you're kidding yourself. What did Roosevelt do? For the most part, he'd march into your house and take it. So it's liberty that is the solution. So and that is important. I think there is a natural tendency when people understand, are given the choice, they will opt for liberty, especially when they discover, and we blame the right things, that it's authoritarianism and it's the hoodlums in Washington and the other governments of the world that are the real problems that we have to deal with.
Exactly as you were mentioning about Roosevelt, Dr. Paul, if we get a dramatic appreciation of the value of gold versus the US dollar, what do you think the risk of gold being made illegal again is?
I think that it probably won't be, but it'll be equivalent. I don't think they're going to do what Roosevelt did and come and knock on the door and make you turn in your gold. But they're going to make it very difficult to use, because if they think you can circumvent government controls, they're not going to like that. So if we're still, and even when the breakdown comes, there still could be dollars, there are still pounds, even though they're not a reserve currency. There still could be a dollar. But let's say for living condition, I have my silver eagle or my gold eagle, and I would need some Federal Reserve notes to buy some bread. If I have to turn it in, and gold is $5,000 an ounce, and they give me the equivalency of 1,000. There's going to be a tax on it. I think they can do that because they do that all the time. But that's when the confrontation is going to occur, because I think in some ways there's a healthy attitude still exists in America that they should be allowed to own guns. In Texas, they actually eliminated this whole thing that you had to have a preliminary check to own a gun. So there are some movements in the direction of self-reliance, but it's still, the bottom line is, and the founders recognize this, they say you had a totally free society, or if you followed the Constitution, John Adams said, it's not going to work if you don't have a moral standards by the people that they're following. And so it doesn't work. But if everybody became an anarchist and said the gun is going to decide everything, it's not going to work. So that's going to invite people to do different things. But I think that, and if you had only moral people go to Washington, things would be a lot better too. But they would have to accept the idea that welfareism and warfareism is illegal, immoral, and unconstitutional, and they had to repeal all that stuff. But that set of standards is available to people who will look for it. Even as bad as the internet is, there's a lot of information out there. If you do some research, you can find some good stuff out there that will explain this. But you have to have a basic intelligence. You have to know what the goals are. You want to live, do you want to just modify an authoritarian society, or do you want to live in a free society? See, I don't think this modification, well, we want to be a moderate. We only want 10%. We're only going to introduce a income tax of 5%, and that won't be too harmful. But guess what? If they're able to tax your income, they say that they own your income, and they'll tell you how much you can have. 5% is 100% of the authority. So when the government gets 100%, then the goose has been cooked. So I think the people, have to realize that is the big issue. How much authority you give your government, and the smaller the better. Well, I'll tell you. And most people when they go to Washington, they sort of accommodate. Just the way Washington works. Getting on committees and raising money and all this stuff. They accommodate by sort of joining the gang. But I can tell you one thing very sincerely. Over the years, every day I was there, I was more reluctant to support hardly anything what the government's doing, because I think self-government is the government that I really want. But that also means that we're dealing in the area of personal morality too, and how to handle those who don't believe in that, and they still believe like government believes that if they need it, they'll take it. There's still a lot of that. That's what you're witnessing on the streets when you see these hoodlums just crashing windows and taking and walking away, police standing by, and they couldn't do anything. They didn't even try to do anything. I mean, I think that's a result of government mismanagement. But I think that in a free society, a libertarian society, it would only come about if you had a moral defense of that society. But to look for a perfect society is more than you can hope for, because there's not going to be a perfect society. But certainly, the bigger the government, the worse our society gets.
So as we talked about the theft of our purchasing power by inflation, Dr. Paul, what are some of the other ways that you think about protecting your wealth in this economic environment?
Well, today it might be hard getting started, but I always believe that you ought to have a little bit of acreage because, just to be someplace which would be less accessible than if you lived in anywhere close to the inner city or in a big city. I think, getting something out there. I think allies are important. I think that family isn't very important because it becomes more important. Neighbors become more important. Allies become more important. Matter of fact, the allies can be both in the survival business as well as in the education business, spreading a message. Because ultimately that's what's going to make the big difference is people accepting the message of liberty and being convinced that it's better than having, just a dictator. I don't deal in the stock market, but I do think precious metals have a pretty long history, and when they have avoided using metals, things have gotten much worse for them. Ronald Reagan told me once when I was on a personal ride on a helicopter with him, and he said, and I was coming from the gold conference, and his comment was, any great nation that went off the gold standard did not remain great. So it's not too bad. He was sympathetic to gold, but. And as a matter of fact, it was he was the president while we were meeting in the gold standard, even though that was passed right before he became president, the Gold Commission.
So if you had a magic wand, Dr. Paul, what are some of the biggest things that you would change about today's system, and what would be your ultimate goal?
Which system?
The economic system, the political system. What do you think needs to be fixed first and foremost, let's say?
Well, the thing of it is, you can do it this way, or you have to work it gradually. I'd get rid of the Fed. The Fed is the facilitator, of all this. If you don't, you say, well, why don't you attack the IRS and the and domestic welfareism? Because the facilitator, if you get rid of the Fed, there's no way they can finance it, and they can't finance wars either. People would have to use it, sound money that you cannot. If you counterfeit, the founders said if you counterfeit a government document, you got the death penalty. That was in 1792 in the Monetary Act of that year, because counterfeiting was a very serious crime. So I think dealing with honesty and money and the Federal Reserve is a big thing because it controls just about everything. So getting rid of it, curtailing it, started with auditing it, start with competition, depends on what stage you're in. But it may be, if the chaos really got out of hand, and maybe there will be a rebuilding, and the Marxists are praying for it, even though they don't believe in God. They're praying for this tragedy and breakdown. But if that happens, it depends on what we do as individuals trying to spread a message. If we've reached a lot of people and we have ways of communicating, we can get people to agree. Just think of what the founders did. They only had like 7% of the people even knew what was going on, and there were still a lot who supported the British. And they came together under dire circumstances. It did, considering history and what happened, they did a fairly good job, even though many even at that time predicted, well, there's too many shortcomings, there's too many loopholes in this, so it won't work. But just getting together and talking about it and listening to the debate, they had a lot of sound understanding of ethical matters, morality matters, monetary affairs. They had gone through the inflation of the continental dollar. So they were very, very well informed. I don't think, I think we have plenty of people like that, but I'm amazed at the education that the founders had, and they didn't have the internet, but they had books, and they studied, they wrote letters, and they did a lot of homeschooling. Some of the, or maybe most of the founders, they usually had tutors, and people came into their homes and did a lot of teaching, but they didn't depend on the Department of Education in Washington to send them down to set up a school for them. That's not the way it worked. Education came in a different manner.
You spoke about, let's say, human morality earlier, Dr. Paul. Do you think returning to a gold standard or a form of honest money alters that human morality and changes that behavior at more of a basic level?
Oh, it would help send a message, but I think it comes the other way. The morality changes, and then you get your sound money. But if the morality changes enough where the introduction is there and the opportunity is there, and people start to understand it, then you're going to get more support for it. But no, I think the moral understanding of money is more important than who's going to be the Secretary of the Treasury, that sort of thing. I really go back to education as being on the top of the list if we ever want to see good reforms.
So you've said in the past that you are optimistic that there are still some people out there that understand these ideas. So what are you most optimistic about right now, Dr. Paul?
The fact that the education has produced a lot of people who know about liberty and know about sound money. Just in my own experience, I mentioned 76 when I first went to Washington, to the point where we had a bill that actually passed overwhelmingly in the House of Representatives that said, we need to look into the Federal Reserve. So I think the education is there. I think for various reasons, people have come around to thinking it is not a good idea to lock up teenagers because they were caught smoking a marijuana cigarette. And so we've made some progress there. But there's so many other places that we haven't made progress. But I think education-wise, I think we talk a lot about a remnant. I think of Leonard Read as a part of that remnant. He was probably born in the early part of the last century. I think he got really active probably right after World War II and did a lot of good. So he was part of a remnant, and society always has a remnant. They have religious remnants that hold and cling to a truth that they value, and there's a political remnant as well. They cling to the good things that have come up. And you can dig out history. You can read the story of the Byzantine Empire and the Byzant. That lasted a long, long time. And it was a gold coin. It was used internationally. So it happened. And so that can happen too if the people realizes it. But it's not going to happen by getting into politics. I got into politics and I did my thing, but what I'm talking about is, okay, what we need to do is get the Congress filled with libertarians. A lot of people, after I would give a talk, would say, oh, okay, I agree with you. I want to do this. I want to run for Congress. I said, that's what you don't want to do. Not the political system, and isn't it? That just happened to be where I was and did it. They had to. They had to get further along in understanding what we were doing in order to change things. But I really think that we have made a lot of progress. We didn't have a Mises Institute. We helped organize that in the early 1980s. There are more solid Austrian economists around. I meet them all the time. I meet very frequently young libertarians who met me in 2007 when they were in high school, but they have their own organization, and they're doing it. I think the money issue introduces people. I started, as a coin collector, which was a little different, but that went over into studying money as a moral issue. So this is this is something that if we have enough freedom, that we will continue to improve and gain the numbers in that remnant of people that know and defend and will defend it and they won't compromise and say, well, okay, this is good. I really don't like this idea that says, Ron, this is true, but you're too much of an idealist, and we know how bad the Marxists are, but libertarians are too far. What we have to do is come meet in the middle, to have bipartisanship. I don't think that's much good. Even though I know that I'm not going to have my way, you're not going to have, all of a sudden we're all going to be libertarian. That's not going to happen. But I think we need to be able to define it. We need to know what the goal is. We need to know what direction we're going in and do our best to achieve it, because that's the way the world works. It's an imperfect world. But I think that if anything, in those presidential races, I was encouraged a lot. In spite of sometimes the things that they did to us, the illegal things they did in the campaign, and also the way things were handled in the media. But nevertheless, there was some reason that young people were responding. I remember the first group, I was at the University of Michigan, very liberal school, and I had a big turnout. And that is where I first heard it. It wasn't me saying it. It was, and the Fed. They started chanting, and the Fed, and the Fed. And it came from the students. And I thought, wow, this is pretty neat. And that's why I ended up writing that book, And the Fed. No, that's what happens to happen. That's why, and that's why you have no idea. You have this program on, and you reach a lot of people. You don't have any idea how many people might pick and choose and know what you're talking about and tell their neighbors, and say, maybe this is a good idea, to promote this cause. So there's much more of that than I ever realized. And some have been very, very creative. But of course, what we're facing is the mob that have taken over practically, through this wokeism stuff. I mean, I am shocked at how pervasive that was. I knew it existed, but to be involved in our schools and, and all the media, in all our institutions, in our political system, they've just rolled over. But nevertheless, I think the ideas of liberty are alive and well, and all I can do is, in my own little way, encourage it and do my best to introduce other people into these ideas.
Excellent, Dr. Paul. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up here?
No, that is it. Remind people that I basically do a live stream on my computer, Ron Paul Liberty Report, at 11 a.m. on daily. And that's my outlet for talking to a few people. And it gets a little bit of attention because I think it's important. I think everybody should have a job like that because I think, and I do this sort of kiddingly, but very sincere. If I talk to a crowd, I said, if you have come to the conclusion that my message is basically right and you understand what I'm talking about, you have a moral obligation to do something about it and spread that message, because that's what part of it is if you believe that for self-reliance and for your own benefit, that we all have an obligation. Besides, I find out the many rallies that I had gone to, I found that it was a lot of fun. And I tell people, have meetings, get together, talk to like-minded people, and you should have fun because it's, if you only look at what the Marxists are doing in Congress, that's pretty boring and it's pretty depressing, and you don't have to be. So I think one thing I have noticed, I don't know if anybody else ever agree with me this, but if you look at the television station, some aren't quite as bad as others, but the ones that are really bad, that are really into this, really cultural Marxism, when I look at them, if they're sitting on TV and there's a panel, I think they are the most boring and sad people. They don't ever smile, And I think that since life is short, and that this should be a fun thing to do and celebrate when you get a convert to liberty, or either that to your moral values or your spiritual values. Celebrate this, and that makes it a little bit more bearing, because some days I read the news and I don't know whether I'm going to be optimistic today. It's so bad. But some of the really bad stuff that I had to live through and watch occurred in the 20th century. That was just horrible. I mean, I remember the tail end of the Depression, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, my being drafted in the 60s. And then also the time I tried to slow down the warmongering in the Middle East in Congress. It's always that's out there. But I've decided that, they'll probably be around for a while. All we can do is our best to seek the truth and then spread the message. But I think that'll take care of me for today.
Excellent, Dr. Paul. And of course, your YouTube channel is is Ron Paul Liberty Report. And also your website is ronpaulinstitute.org. Dr. Paul, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great being with you.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.